What's a scientific fact that creeps you out? Caterpillars turn completely into goo in their cocoon and then become a butterfly. Edit. This blew up. According to my inbox, many people have been creeped out. A good day's work. And there is evidence they retain memories from their pre-goo days. Memories of strong positive/negative stimuli that they show preference for/aversion to, even after metamorphosis. Pre-goo days. I love it. We use the expression to become a butterfly about people who have emerged from tough or dark times. So it should only be natural to talk about their past as pre-goo days. The brain can play tricks on you. When you look at a clock and the second hand seems to freeze for a moment, your brain is actually generating a false memory and your perception of time stretches slightly backward. This effect is called chronostasis. Her perception is dope. There's a whole spectrum of ways reality is experienced simultaneously, which I find really interesting. That's happened to me so many times. I didn't know this was common. I just figured maybe my brain experiences mini strokes every once in a while. By the way guys, if you are enjoying this video so far, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel. It will help us out quite a bit, and if you don't enjoy the videos in the future anymore, you can always unsubscribe. Let's get back to the video. That so many vegetables came from the same plant. Broccoli, kale, kohlrabi, Brussels sprouts, cabbage, etc. They are, botanically speaking, the same species. Humans have just bred them to emphasize different traits, buds, leaves, tubers. Imagine if humans were as genetically flexible. Imagine a person walking around with giant toes, but otherwise normal. Actually, plant genetics in general is a weird world. I mean, if we spent generations selectively breeding ourselves, based on traits like giant toes, something like that could happen. Just look at dogs. The canine family is actually unusual in that respect. The entire canine family has slippery genes. I don't understand it. I'm not a geneticist, just read about it, and is much more variable in their phenotypes than other families of mammals. Look at other animals that have been domesticated for thousands of years. Cats, horses, sheep and goats, cattle. The breeds vary in their appearances, but nowhere near as much as different breeds of dogs do. A Shetland pony and a Percher and draft horse resemble each other much more than do a pug and a greyhound. Ditto a Siamese cat versus an American Shorthair, or a Nubian goat vs a boar goat. Parasites can live anywhere inside of you, for years unnoticed. A simple migraine could be a tapeworm crawling in your brain, causing damage. Your eyes begin to blur frequently, and you don't know why, and it's not getting better. Losing weight and having diarrhea, but it's not a stomach bug. Well, I guess it is. You are having a difficult time catching your breath and your chest doesn't feel right. It could just be some parasite hanging out, using you. Top 5 ways to intensify anxiety. Number 1, this post. This post covers all from number 1 to 5. Ah yes. Day was going fine, until I was reminded that a random pain in my body could be a parasite. The sun could wipe us all out in a millisecond. Artificial intelligence surpassing humanity is an inevitability, and I'm breathing manually. Some mutations of just one letter in the DNA code can kill the fetus almost instantly, but some people live and have a seemingly healthy life while missing a whole chromosome. If you understand anything about biology, that's completely wild. I work with children with special needs. You'd be surprised to find out how many kids you think just have a generic or common disability actually have a super rare chromosome mutation. I know more than one child where fewer than 100 people in the world have been diagnosed with their particular condition. In some cases a piece of a chromosome has broken off, and their disability is due to where it reattached to another chromosome. Science is amazing. And this is just based on the kids whose parents did genetic sequencing. There are so many we would never know. Edit, and they're all awesome kids. Taking this moment with a highly rated comment to remind y'all that using words like retards and autists to call yourself and others stupid is a slur. I don't mean if you actually have autism and are discussing yourself. I'm talking about the posts on WSB. It sucks to see the R word making a comeback. We can do better. Try a different word. It's not that hard. Your brain literally creates your own reality and your senses and body just go along with it. And this accurately explains how schizophrenics truly believe the voices they hear, or their other delusions are correct. Something in their wiring of how to interpret the world has gone wrong and their brain is only making sense of the reality that it is being shown. I work in healthcare, not mental health care but emergency medicine. The number of schizophrenics I have met that are completely aware the voices are in their heads, so they ignore them is mind-boggling. Have you ever hallucinated before? I genuinely recommend trying it, because it makes it very clear how this works. Also, a lot of schizophrenics are pretty normal, well-adjusted people aside the schizophrenia. So like if you were sitting in your room and a dog floated in attached to a balloon, or the number 7 started telling you you're worthless, at first you're gonna get freaked out by it. But once you confirm that it's not there, you're going to realize, okay, this is me. It helps that a lot of hallucinations are occurring as well. So if you know they happen, you can just tell yourself they're not, even though everything in you is saying that's not the case. You get and cure cancer in your own body thousands of times a day. Excuse me, what? Your body produces thousands and thousands of cells with damaged DNA. It's a bit of exaggeration to call them cancer, but if any of these cells were to survive, they could become cancerous. Your immune system destroys them before they get to that point. This is also why, if you were to live forever, you would eventually get cancer, because the chances of your body missing them statistically increases. This occurs thousands upon thousands upon thousands of times a day. Whoa, this is interesting and mad. It's pretty cool. It's one of the reasons why the older we get, the higher the cancer risk, and why it would be nearly impossible to ever hit 150 years old. Cancer always wins. Also, the cells that take care of this begin to die off. Elephants and sharks have huge numbers, and it's why they rarely get cancer. The first AI that can successfully pass the Turing test would be able to pretend that it couldn't. For the record, the Turing test is a concept, not a concrete testing method. More importantly, versions of a Turing test have in fact been passed by many systems. The Turing test is considered a flawed indicator of intelligence because imitating predictable, believable responses does not demonstrate intelligence. It's just a logic tree modeling conversation patterns. It's also abusable, as some of the bots that passed were designed to act like impulsive elementary schoolers, so random answers would still make sense. That as the permafrost melts, a lot of locked up methane will be released, and microorganisms there will wake up and do their jobs, breaking down organic matter and release more methane and greenhouse gases. Thank you. This is actually a huge problem that is not very well known, as there are massive amounts of carbon stored in the permafrost. These effects haven't been taken into account in climate models, as we do not fully understand the processes involved with the thaw and release yet. However, wouldn't the then living plants there help solve the problem? Is it net negative or net positive? Weird thought, but could we turn the gem industry and material science engineers onto this? Could we convince the capitalists to do some of the environmental work for us, sort of like how we had to lean on tech companies to step in when governments were slowing down on space? A gamma ray burst could wipe out all life on Earth instantly with no warning. What? An ultra-powerful supernova that sends incredibly powerful blasts of gamma rays across the galaxy at light speed. If one hits Earth, everything is erased instantly. There is virtually no way to ever see one coming. So we would never even know it happened before we were all killed. But we have a reasonable amount of data of all the nearby objects that would even be capable of producing one, and none of them are oriented in a way that would shoot one towards us anytime soon. Aren't there solar flares that could destroy all electronics and appliances? Living through the one-day Texas snowstorm, I don't know how I'll survive if something like that happens. The sudden urge to jump off of a very high height. You can be physically and mentally stable to the greatest degree and still have this feeling when at such a high height. I heard it's the call of the void, and it's a normal human thought. The best example is when you're driving along and think, for a fraction of a second, about swerving into oncoming traffic, or into a tree. Is it the same as when I'm in the middle of listening to a presentation and wonder what would happen if I got up and ran for the podium, screaming? That's actually called an intrusive thought. It might be a similar or related concept, but essentially intrusive thoughts are thoughts of things you would never do, nor never normally think about. They for some reason get stuck in your head and can be insanely dark or disturbing. They don't reflect your personality, however. Most of the water on the earth will rain down at some point. The crappy fact about this is that the human body is 60% water, meaning that at some point the same water that runs throughout your body, the one on your blood, bones, brain, etc., will rain down at some point. I actually find this to be a nice thought. Yes, I take pleasure in the idea that some of my bits used to be bits of dinosaurs. And I take comfort in the idea that someday some of my bits and bits of earthly things that I loved will be bits of something else. Deep time is a hard thing to really wrap your head around, but this is one of the parts I really enjoy. Yeah, it's kind of like becoming one with the universe/life around you, but in a more physical way instead of spiritual. Obligate suicide. In some species of animals, multiple offspring are born, but only one is actually raised by the mother. The others are born only as backup in case the firstborn doesn't survive. When the firstborn is fine, which is the typical case, it kills the others. Nature is brutal but efficient. It is not efficient. It wastes time and resources in developing organism that won't survive. What if the mutation that would have thrust the species forward died by its siblings or its parents because of some BS? That's a waste. What if trying to raise two resulted in both dying and losing the fabled species-saving mutation? These animals evolved to have only the healthiest survive for a reason, and you're completely discounting that because you think it's morally reprehensible. Lol. There is more microorganisms on your body than people in Earth. This one creeps me out so badly. I know it doesn't matter, and I can't feel them. However, whenever it is pointed out that there are microorganisms in my eyebrows and on my face, I get super itchy. It's one of those facts I would have loved to never have known. If I wind up with no eyebrows tonight, it's because of you, fellow Redditor. Same. I started itching just now. If it'll help, try to imagine your human cells as making up a sprawling city, and all the bacteria, viruses, and other tiny wartsits that live in harmony with you inhabiting it like ordinary residents. They belong there, and are in many ways as much a part of you as your own human cells. That the only reason you are a functional human is that your DNA is so tangled that entire sections can't get decoded and screw it up. Edit. Turns out I must have majorly misunderstood something, as this is very wrong. Thanks Reddit, but as far as I'm aware the brain fact is true though. Actually better one. If you disconnect the halves of the brain and ask them to pick out something they prefer, your hands will disagree. What's your favorite color will result in one hand choosing red, but one choosing green. Go look up split brain patients. So I read that in people whose brain hemispheres communication has been severed, their hands will actively contradict each other. So if their right hand is doing something deemed incorrect by the right hemisphere, all lefty will come in and stop the right hand. The left hand will grab the right hand to stop it. The left hand will grab the right hand. That freaks me out so effing much. I remember learning about this from some old documentary about alien hand syndrome when I was a kid. Fascinating stuff. After being decapitated, there's still few seconds of brain activity that happen before you snuff out. I read this in the book Stiff by Mary Roach. I'm not sure how much I recall or how correctly I recall, but two things stuck with me. Apparently they had to change the head catching baskets sometimes because the severed heads would try to chew through them. The other thing that stuck with me is that some doctor was experimenting with the heads right after decapitation. He would inject oxygenated blood into the heads and they would move their eyes around and look at him. Experimenting with the full amputee person, you mean? Chewing through the baskets seems like a dubious claim. Do the jaw muscles still have enough of an anchor somewhere on the neck to even open the mouth? Heck, I'm not sure what muscles even open our mouth, now that I think about it. I'm about to go down a rabbit hole. We know more about the moon than we do our own oceans. This is why I think there's some sort of super ancient, super huge sea creature swimming around in there somewhere. Just because people took a submarine to the bottom and stayed there for a while and then came back up and saw nothing doesn't mean it's 100% a fact that there's nothing to see. My guess is either they did see something new / unusual / huge and lied so we wouldn't know, B, they didn't see anything because they just weren't down there long enough for anything to come by, or C, they didn't see anything because their light / submarine / other equipment scared away anything that would have normally been there. I really feel like at least one of these has to be true. Option C is definitely the most likely. Creatures at that depth are probably used to the complete darkness that comes from being super deep in an ocean, so lights from a submarine or something similar would probably throw them off. Not to mention that there are some things, like anglerfish, that do use visuals as bait. Option A is a conspiracy theory at best, and option B is probably limited by human technology. Years ago I saw an episode of Monsters Inside Me where this guy was doing something outside, and a fly flew into his eye. It only made contact for about a microsecond, but it was enough time for it to lay eggs. After they hatched they started eating his eye from the inside, and he was starting to go blind until a doctor figured out what was wrong. Just imagine that, getting your eye eaten from the inside, and losing your sight all, because a fly very briefly made contact with you. Ever since I learned about this, I get really paranoid when there is a fly around my face because of the fact that this could possibly happen to me. I usually really enjoy your stories, but I really don't like this one. Not at all. Nope. No thanks. Speaking of eye damage, getting poked in the eye with a pine needle really sucks. It's because the pine needle can pierce the outer layers of the cornea, but doesn't go deep enough to break into the repair layer. So the damage never gets fixed, unless a doctor pokes at your eye with a sharp needle, to activate the repair process. Honestly, nothing is more creepy than how deep sea anglerfish mate. The deep sea is dark, and the anglerfish are spread very thinly. Therefore, when an anglerfish meets another anglerfish, it's incredibly important they get the chance to mate over and over again. The evolutionary strategy that deep sea anglerfish devised is extra creepy. The male latches onto the female, biting her and never letting go. That way he can inseminate the eggs she drops. Not that bad so far, right? But wait, how does he eat if he's latched on his mate? Well, the circulatory systems fuse and the female provides nutrients for the male through this fused circulatory system. The true horror starts here. The organs of male start to wither and atrophy, being absorbed into the female. Eventually, the male is reduced to a lump of testicles the females use to fertilize their eggs. Females are often covered in bumps of several males that have melted into the female, becoming a literal body horror lump of meat on the female. Maybe it's good H.P. Lovecraft didn't survive to the days of the internet. He would have had a field day with this one. Fun fact, H.P. Lovecraft was absolutely terrified of everything. Fears include weird geometry, people of color, except Mexican people, because he thought they had magic Aztec powers, interracial marriage, poor people, indigenous cultures, and the standard cosmic stuff we all know him for today. Overly Sarcastic Productions has a pretty interesting and funny video on him that I definitely recommend. A buddy of mine is a pilot for a major airline, in top 3 of airlines. I asked him exactly how much flying are you actually doing during a flight, like how much are you controlling the plane? He said about 5%, 0.95% of a flight is completely automated. He said has involved a little bit on takeoff and on the landing, but for the most part the plane flies itself, unless something major happens in flight. This doesn't bother me, though. Realizing machinery fails, and that is terrifying, no matter what vehicle you're in, I feel better that a human is there to mitigate rather than operate this type of machinery on their own. What a task that is. Edit. Aren't most plane fails due to human error? And that pilot that let his kid fly the plane, who ultimately caused it to crash, was he kidding me with this? Lol. Not that it's funny, I'm pretty pissed about it. There is something called the squeeze, where when people had old scuba suits with tubes, you could actually get sucked into that tube if the pressure was off. You are literally shredded through your own breathing tube. Hate to be that guy, but that's hard hat surface supplied diving, not scuba. Scuba is by definition self-contained. But yes, it is possible. Mythbusters showed it in rather spectacular fashion, though the pig carcass didn't actually make it all the way up the tube. Edit. For those interested, here is the Mythbusters video warning. A little gory, though broadcast TV gory. Wasn't there a deep sea dive where the pressure was off and a guy got sucked into a tube on an underwater work site? I can't remember the exact situation, but I do know that he basically just got sucked up into it and shredded. The sun will eventually die out. When I was 10 I was watching the Discovery Science and I loved my science documentaries, and this one was going on about how the sun will expand to a red giant and expand outwards and devour Mercury and Venus, and all life on Earth will die and the oceans will boil away. No word of a lie, I had nightmares that night and I cried about it. Me too. Was super obsessed with space around age 10 and read this fact in a book, and they use the phrase Earth will be cooked to a cinder, and I was so upset and bothered by it. Cue existential crisis. Not exactly scientific or creepy, but it's close enough, and I want to contribute. Mouth pipetting was a thing in labs in the 1980s. A pipette is, for simplicity's sake, a glass straw that lab staff would use to transfer liquids. Nowadays we use special bulbs that when squeezed would suck up the liquid for us. Kinda like a turkey baster or eyedropper. Before we had these bulbs, lab workers had to use their mouths to suck up the liquid. Which meant if they weren't careful they'd get whatever they were sucking up in their mouth. I'm currently training to be MLAT, and those fluids would usually be urine, liquid stool, sputum and so on. Yo, mouth pipetting is still a thing. Back in 2012, my school, in a flash brilliance, decided that rubber bulbs were a distraction and students would be fine sucking up liquids through non-sterilized glass. Think I sucked up acetic acid one time. When I got to college, the first thing they said during the safety brief was that mouth pipetting was an absolute no-no, and explained in great detail how dangerous it is. Thank the Lord I've moved on to micropipettes. There is a supermassive star 7600 light years away named Eta Carinae. It is about 200 times the mass of our sun. Its size is about the size of our entire solar system. It is 5 million times brighter than our sun. And it is very near supernova. It might have already happened, and the shock wave is on the way. It probably is far enough away to where won't destroy our solar system. Probably. I just looked that up because of curiosity. According to Wikipedia, at 7,500 light years from the star it is unlikely to directly affect terrestrial life forms, as they will be protected from gamma rays by the atmosphere and from some other cosmic rays by the magnetosphere. The main damage would be restricted to the upper atmosphere, the ozone layer, spacecraft, including satellites and any astronauts in space. So basically you don't have much to worry about unless you're in orbit. This is the end of the video. Thank you guys for staying with me till the end. If you enjoyed watching this, you might as well watch these too.